Welcome to the Power of Reading, a book review program that discusses the latest Catholic books. A book is a dream you hold in your hand. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.
Hello and welcome to the Power of Reading program, a book review program. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul. And in our Power of Reading program, we continue our journey in reviewing, in commenting and reflecting on the latest Catholic books. And this program, actually, we aim to promote together and revive the reading culture, because reading has a good and lasting effect on our faith as Christians and also in our everyday life and also in our journey as Christians. So we know that reading is not easy for us today in our generation, where we have the modern technology, we have the internet, we have easy access to information, and we may not be so much encouraged, and we may even be misled to think that books are being overtaken by the modern communication technology. However, we realize that even with this modern technology, the book is one of the best way of learning, and some of the things we can learn through reading, we may not be able to achieve through the internet. So we encourage you, dear listeners, that together we may revive the culture of reading. And you are listening to this Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. Now, today we are going to review a very important book, something that is so important in our journey as Catholics, as Christians, and that is a Catholic Catechism. And this actually is a kind of manual. It's not really a book that one can read as one would read a storybook, but it's a book that is a resource book in our journey of faith, or a book we can use reading chapter by chapter, reflecting every day to help us understand better our faith. And this book, A Catholic Catechism, actually is prepared by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. And this project actually involved a lot of people. There were a lot of people who were involved in this project to help understand how we assimilate the faith, mainly catechists, teachers, parents, also people in small Christian communities. And also there were others who are involved in what we call the editing, the final editing of the book. And these are Father Alexander Lucy Smith. This priest is a Rosminian priest, the congregation called the Institute of Charity. We also have Father Cornelius Murphy. He's an SMA priest, Society of African Missions. Bishop Morris Muhatia Makumba of Nakuru Diocese, and Father Rinaldo Ronzani of the Comboni Missionaries, and also Father Patrick Ryan Millhill Fathers, and Father Vincent Salemi, together with many, many other people. So we realize that when you're looking at a catechism, and as we review this book, A Catholic Catechism, Follow Me, I Am the Way, the Truth, and the Life, we realize that we are dealing with, we can say, a deposit of faith, a kind of an encyclopedia of the teachings of the Catholic Church. So a catechism, and the word catechism is from the Greek language, is actually a summary or even an exposition of doctrine traditionally used in Christian religious teachings. And catechisms are doctrinal manuals, often in the form of questions followed by answers to be memorized, a format that has sometimes been used even in non-religious or what we call the secular contexts as well. This catechism that we are going to review today doesn't have this kind of format, because this format has changed, and we are going to look a bit at the history behind this, because a catechism is a book we approach with a bit of historical background. We can't take it only from the face value. Now, in the Catholic Church, what happens is that an elaborate catechism for many years has always been targeted to the priest, that is the clergy, teachers, parents, and catechisms have that valuable, resource of our Christian faith over the ages, and they contain great wisdom in a very summarized or concise format. Now, when we talk about the Catechism of the Catholic Church in general, we are talking about a process that has evolved over the years. And so before we review our book today, a Catholic Catechism that was prepared mainly for the church in Kenya, but also can be used in many other contexts, especially in Africa, we are going to have a little step back. I would want to take you back to the history or the origins of what we call catechisms, because sometimes we just imagine these things happen just like that. Maybe one pope woke up one morning and decided there should be a catechism. But this is a heritage that we have because of the history that we have as Christians. So we are going to take a break so that we prepare ourselves. You prepare yourself, dear listener, as we review our book of today, A Catholic Catechism by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. Welcome back, dear listeners. You're listening to the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul, and today we review the book, A Catholic Catechism by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. Now, as we took a break, I mentioned that we should first of all have a historical background that will help us to understand the origin of the catechism within the Catholic Church. Now, we know that the word catechesis or catechism is borrowed from the Greek language, and this term catechesis means to make resound or to have an echo. And actually, catechesis originally denoted oral transmission from teacher to student or instruction by dialogue. And this is what we even see Jesus doing with his disciples. This was common also among the Jewish teachers, the rabbis. It was also common among the philosophers of the time. So this was a way of teaching. And as with many things in Christian custom, the practice of catechizing was adapted from a similar style of instruction in what we call the Jewish synagogues and rabbinical schools. Somebody like St. Paul went to the rabbinical school under the guidance of Gamaliel. And the rabbis had what we call a dialogical method, and the Greeks had what we call the Socratic method. And both of which of these methods actually informed Christian catechesis. Remember, the Christian faith did not grow in a vacuum. It grew in a culture, it grew in a context. So as the Christian faith was being transmitted, people used the methods that they knew. We see that often here in Africa, if you want people to remember something, especially in the rural setting where still life is a little more communal, you use stories. People love stories, and actually almost all cultures love stories. If you hear a story, it's easier for us to retain the teaching rather than just a kind of explanation that may use beautiful words but may be difficult in terms of remembering. So we see this catechesis was a method used both by the Greeks and also the Jewish rabbis in transmitting whatever their teachings were. So you see the Jews, rabbis were transmitting the Jewish faith, Judaism, the tenets of Judaism, whereas the Greeks were also passing their philosophy, their wisdom of living. So mainly it was dialogical. And that's why some of us who did catechism much earlier, we had that experience of the question and answer catechism, whereby you could be asked, who is God? You could be asked, why am I created? And there was already a ready set answer to that. That was a way that people learned at that time. And that's where we derived the catechism, the idea of this transmission of faith. And we notice that Christian tradition holds that catechetical schools were established almost immediately by the apostles themselves. So we notice that catechetical schools, the places where people were taught faith, were actually established soon after the death, the resurrection, and ascension of Jesus by the apostles. And one of the most important of these schools was said to have been established by Mark the Evangelist in Alexandria, Egypt. And we know this through a historical book known as the Eusebius Ecclesiastic History, which states that Mark came to Egypt during the first or third year of the Roman Emperor Claudius and evangelized in Alexandria between 61 and 68 AD. And Alexandria was also the school of theology where Clement, St. Clement also became a pope, and Origen were teachers. And some modern scholars favor the theory that the four written Gospels of the New Testament were products of catechetical schools founded by the apostles or disciples of the apostles. So you see how easily connected catechesis is. Now, I'm going to say something that will be strange to most of us, to remember that we know that tradition always comes even before the scripture, even in the Old Testament. The information is passed on first orally before it is committed in writing. So tradition that we give a very special space in the Catholic Church actually came even before the Gospels, because the Gospels are a fruit of the teachings, the reflections of some of the apostles of Jesus. So we see that the catechetical schools were founded by the apostles or the disciples of the apostles, and actually we can even say that the Gospels are actually a product of these schools wanting to keep this information, because the apostles were also dying and there was fear that the message might become distorted with time. And one of the earliest documents that we encounter in terms of looking at catechesis or even the method of catechesis is a document called the Didache. The Didache is believed to have been written between 70 and 160 AD, and probably we can say it is the first written catechism. Catechism was going on even the time of Paul. If you read his letters, actually most of it is a kind of catechesis trying to expound what is the meaning of the passion, the suffering, passion, death of our Lord Jesus Christ? What is the meaning of God sending the Father? What is the connection between what happened in the Old Testament and what they were experiencing at their time? And he gives us that connection. That is a catechesis. And it is through schools, such as the school in Alexandria, that summaries of doctrine were produced with a view to carefully and methodically hand down the teachings of the church and as a summary of what must be believed. So in the end, we see that there is this growth within the faith that was coming up of understanding, if we are going to bring people on board, what should they believe? What should be the teaching? And that is the purpose of catechesis. The book that we are reviewing today, A Catholic Catechism, helps us with that. So we notice one of the things that happened quite quickly is what we call the creed, the I believe. And if you check in any of your prayer books, you will find that you have two creeds. There's what we call the Nicene Creed, which is longer and elaborate and very theological, that grew out of the eastern part of the Catholic Church, the Greek-speaking church. They were more elaborate. Remember, they were philosophers, so for them, everything had to be very elaborate, using the proper words. And then we have what we call the Apostles' Creed, which was dominant in what we call the Latin churches, the churches that spoke Latin, and these churches were found in the western part of Europe. We can say Europe, that was the world as it was known at that time. And of course, there were other points that came out in understanding the transmission of the faith. For example, there was the Lord's Prayer, the main prayer that Jesus taught in the Gospels that we find in 3 of the 4 Gospels. So the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, was taught as the model of how to pray as Christians. Then, of course, we have the 10 Commandments, which were actually the summary of how to live. And at various times and places, special chapters were added to the manuals and for instructions on sacraments, the creed, the Te Deum, and elements of the liturgy. So already with this, a little bit of history, it gives you an idea of what you'd expect in a proper catechism. You will find the creed that tells us why do we believe and what do we believe. You'll find the prayer of our Father, how do we communicate with God. We also find the 10 Commandments, how are we called to live. If I'm a Christian, what guides me and how should I live from a moral, social point of view? And of course, you see how do we come together as a community to celebrate, and there you have the liturgy and the sacraments. Remember, the liturgy started immediately, people gathering in homes and breaking the bread together. So those are the 4 points that you find in the catechism, and usually they are arranged as the creed. Then you have the 10 Commandments, then you have the sacraments, and eventually you have prayer. So this is how the catechism that we shall eventually have a look through will be divided. And already we see the origin is as far back as the time of the apostles. And of course, we see that as the church grew, there were issues that came up. The case of adult converts. Remember, most of the people are adult converts. What instruction was to precede their baptism? In the case of baptized infants, what followed after the baptism, you see? So baptizing infants in the East, actually you see that for the Eastern Church, actually the infant is baptized and actually even confirmed. So you see, these are the things that the catechism helps us to understand and to see how we can do them, because it helps us to grow in our faith. Catechesis is a way of understanding and living the faith. So whatever is done should be geared towards living and understanding the faith, and of course understanding the gift that God has given us through Jesus Christ. And of course we see that other catechisms started coming up for First Holy Communion, for Post-Communion, for preparation for confirmation, for marriage, and things like that. Now, when you look at some of the people that we see in the earlier years of the church after the time of the apostles, we see somebody like Cyril of Jerusalem, who lived about 315 and 386. We are told that he left 16 books of instructional sermons explaining the creed to families seeking baptism. So the creed was there in concise format, but Cyril of Jerusalem, this bishop in Jerusalem, decides to explain it to the families that sought baptism, and actually he left 16 instructional sermons. And the same Cyril also had 5 books of instructions attributed to him concerning the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, in the Christian faith, and in the Eucharist. So these are also the sources in which we tap when we are also trying to update our catechisms for this modern time. And of course, he wrote other things for the benefit of those who recently received any of the sacraments, and that is from the eastern part of the church. When you come to the western church of the church, the hero here is St. Augustine, who lived in 354 to 430, and he has also a book on the treatise of catechizing, De Catechizandis Rudibus. This was written for teachers. Now we can call them catechists today. And actually it came to dominate together with his work on the basics of doctrine and prayer. the Enchiridion. That book also was very important. And we know that St. Augustine also developed the understanding of the original sin. Why do we need to be baptized to become the children of God if we are already created by God? We are his children. And he tries to explain that meaning, that kind of openness that is expected of us to enter into a deeper relationship with God. Now, we know that in Christianity we have a very important moment whereby Christianity until 313 AD was persecuted for about 3 centuries. For 300 years, the Christians were persecuted. They used to hide. They used to do their things in a hidden manner. And each time you were caught, the Roman authorities would execute them. But there was the edict by Constantine, what we call the Edict of Milan in 1313 AD. And this followed the freedom of belief, meaning that Christianity was declared a religion of the empire. And with this, actually, catechesis, this transmission of faith became a bit of a challenge because the people now assumed Christianity just as a way of life. There was no challenge, there was no danger, there was no deeper commitment. And we see some difficulties that started with this time, even in the Christian faith itself, because people were no longer required to die for their faith. It was no longer that radical choice that people made. In fact, it is at this time you find that some people decided to go into the desert as monks, as hermits, and all those kind of people. So we know that every stage of the history of the church, it affects many other areas within the church. And also our catechesis, the topic that we are dealing with today, as we review this book, A Catholic Catechism, was also affected. And for many years, we realized that there was a bit of a neglect, especially when we are talking about the people who are not closer to the centers of faith. That is, from the Roman point of view, it was Rome and also what we call the Byzantine empires. But in 829 AD, we see a council in Paris that records the bishop alarm, the bishop's concern over the neglect of catechetical instruction. And very simple instructions manuals survive at this time between the year 350 to the year about 850. We don't find a lot of instructional manuals. There was something by the monks in St. Gall around the year 720 or something of Notka of Balbuls. In 1912 was also Ottfried of Wesenberg in Germany in 870 and things like that. But most of the time, there was very little that was being done for the catechesis. And this also shows the decline that we will find that goes through the church for some time. And eventually, we see that there will be a time in the church, and this is after the Council of Trent and after the Reformation, where we find that the people decided, no, we need to do something, because people ended up just being devotional, believing in God, saying a lot of prayers, but with little understanding of the tenets of the doctrines of the church, which actually was very, very important to be handed on. And also these times we see a rise of many heresies, a rise of even other churches. You see the Church of England already breaking away when the king doesn't understand the issue of marriage within the Catholic Church, to marry one wife in spite of maybe childlessness, and he decides to get another wife, and there is little understanding of what this is, and also the refutation of the authority of the Roman pontiff. And eventually we see that there is a challenge also with the Reformation, the time of Martin Luther, because again of this poor understanding of the catechesis. So when we are talking about catechesis, we have to know that actually it's very important for all of us. And this book, A Catholic Catechism, is actually designed to help us to understand our faith, so that whatever choices we make, whatever decisions we make, are choices and decisions that are informed by a clear understanding of the faith. Of course, we can talk also about terminologies that we encounter when we are dealing with the area of catechesis. You know that catechesis is an elementary form of religious instruction. And when we are talking about catechesis, you're talking about what is transmitted orally. And this is traditionally under the guidance, first of all, of parents. Usually parents are the ones who even teach the child to do a sign of the cross, to say the simple prayers. It is also under the guidance of the priest. It is also under the guidance of what we call the religious teachers or catechists or other individuals, including what we call deacons, religious priests and sisters, but also it can be within now what we call the small Christian community. We see that most people desire baptism or desire to bless their marriages because they have that experience of catechesis within the small Christian community. Now, we also have another word that we use, catechetics, and this is the practice of this kind of instruction or the study of it. When you go, there are subjects or there is a course on catechetics. So somebody can go to study how to give the instruction on faith. Then also a catechist is one who engages in such religious instruction. Now, in the traditional format, as I've already mentioned earlier, we see that the catechisms historically were in a dialogue form. Of course, for us, we saw it as a question and answer catechism, but it was supposed to be a dialogue. It was even a way of using the speech in the early times of the church, whereby people had a dialogue whereby there was an issue raised and a response given to that issue. And it was very, very common. So this tradition actually has gone through for many, many, many years. It's only with the Vatican II that we started seeing catechisms that were not question and answer. But until today, most of us have that nostalgia for the question and answer catechism because it's not an absolute way of learning, but the only challenge that you find with a catechism like that is already the answers are given. So for some people, it is very difficult to make an inquiry, to make a reflection, to go deeper rather than the answer that is given. And it can also become a challenge to the faith because the faith may fail to become an experience for the person having that kind of catechesis, especially in our modern times where we have a lot of suggestions over the same topic. Even when you are sick, you may have 100 medications which can cure the same illness. So you have to have a lot of knowledge and understanding. So also in the area of faith, we have the same challenge whereby many questions have many, many answers. And sometimes it's very difficult to understand which is the best answer unless we have that experience, a deeper understanding, but also a personal experience in the area of faith. So I know that I have said a lot. I just wanted to give you a little background into the catechism. I didn't want to just rush into the book and start explaining what we find in the book. So we are going to take a break. This is the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. Welcome back to the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host, Sister Beatrice, as we continue our journey in the world of books, where we are able to review some of the most important books in our Catholic faith, and also books that can help us in our journey of life and to be able to live in a better way our Christian faith. And today we are reviewing the book, A Catholic Catechism, and this book was prepared from the larger catechism that was commissioned by Pope John Paul II and issued in 1992. And this A Catholic Catechism, Follow Me, I Am the Way, the Truth and the Life, is prepared by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops to help the Christians to be able to digest the doctrine of our faith. And this catechism actually even gives us a chance to see where the topics that are shared here, which are actually exactly as the ones which are in the main catechism, if one needs to read further, the numbers of that catechism are indicated in this Catechism of the Catholic Church. And actually this catechism reflects the richness of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it aims at leading the reader and Christian to put Christ at the center of their lives as true disciples. And as I already mentioned when I was doing the introduction, the historical part of catechesis in the Catholic Church, A Catholic Catechism, the book that we are reviewing today, is divided into 4 traditional parts. That is the profession of faith, the celebration of the Christian mystery, the life in Christ, and Christian prayer. Now, the profession of faith deals with the creed, which emphasizes what Christian faith is and how it is to be lived, rooted in the Holy Trinity. And this part actually is divided into 2 sections. The first section deals with the whole area of believing. How do we come to know God? How does He reveal Himself to us? And this includes topics like revelation, God's will for everyone to be saved, our desire for God. God reveals Himself to our ancestors, God's revelation through Israel, handing down of revelation, the Bible, and our response to God. And the second section of this first part deals with the creed itself, and every article is explained, helping us to understand what we really believe. If we say, I believe in one God, the maker of heaven and earth, that is an article of the creed. What does it really mean? It is explained in the book that we are reviewing today. The second part, the celebration of the Christian mystery, is the part that helps us not just to appreciate our faith as an intellectual activity, but also to celebrate it. And it also has 2 sections that deal with the Paschal mystery, that is the first section, and the second section with the sacraments of the Church. And this also includes the topic on sacramentals, things like holy water, all the other sacramentals that you use, the cross, the statues of the blessed, the pictures of the saints and all that. All those sacramentals are involved there. And also it explains Christian funerals. Then part 3 deals with the life in Christ. And actually this is the ethical part of our faith. And it also has 2 sections, one dealing with the human vocation, which include human dignity, what is a moral act, what is our conscience, virtues, sin, community life, law, and grace. And the second section takes care of the 10 commandments, and it explains each one of them. Part 4 is on the Christian prayer. It also has 2 sections. The first section deals with the topic of prayer in the Christian life, and it explains what is prayer, revelation on prayer in the Old and the New Testaments, praying with Mary, praying for various occasions, and also difficulties in prayer. And the second section explains the prayer that Jesus taught, and that is our Father. So the aim of this catechism by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops is to enable us to understand or to simplify the larger Catechism of the Catholic Church and to contextualize it, to bring it closer to us in a manner that helps the people to understand it, to live it. And it keeps in mind the needs of the people in this context of Kenya, of Africa, in terms of pastoral care, status, cultural background, and education. And this is because faith, which is what is handed down in the work of catechesis, is proclaimed and lived, and it is supposed to touch every aspect of our life. And this also, it means that the faith or the handing down of the doctrine needs to be inculturated, to be put in context that it makes it possible for people to understand and also to put it into practice. So in this catechism, you see that there's a lot of also reference to the African culture and context in order to help the reader to see how the positive aspects of our culture are actually parts of the gospel values. And the book further is enriched with original drawings as a way of creating a dialogue between the catechist and the reader. And at the same time, other catechetical tools are presented at the end of each topic. At the end of each topic, there are things to remember, some questions to think about, which can be discussed in a small group or in a small Christian community or even within a family, so that each lesson or each topic remains with the reader, with the person who is looking at this book. And this book actually can be used in many contexts. It can be used as a personal reader. It can be used to teach catechism, especially to adults, or as a resource book for youth and young people. It can also be used in a small Christian community as a way of growing in faith. A topic can be read each time the community meets. It can also be used in a working group where people take time to pray together. It can also even be used within the family. And no matter how many books we read, besides the Bible, which is of great importance and has a special place, the next book every Catholic should have at home and should be able to read, from my point of view, and I believe the point of view of the Church, is a Catholic catechism, because that puts you into context in understanding the faith. Because most of us have the catechesis that we learned when we were preparing for our first Holy Communion, for our confirmation. We were young. We do not have the challenges that we experience today. We did not have the reasoning or the understanding or the intellectual maturity that we have today. So it is important. And this book, I tell you, dear listener, is very well prepared, is beautiful, it's interesting, is one of those books you can pick and actually never put down. The only suggestion I would give you is, if possible, to read 1 or 2 topics at a time, because for the sake of assimilating or growing in your faith, it is better to take one small bite at a time, because faith also is a challenge. It's not the easiest thing that one is able to do. So our book today has been a Catechism of the Catholic Church by the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops, a book that helps us to enter into depth in understanding our faith, in understanding the doctrine of the Church. And I hope that you shall be able to get yourself this book. I would really encourage that everyone should have a copy, or at least every family should have a copy of a Catholic catechism. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and you shall really enjoy what you shall be experiencing in this book. So for today, that is what we had for you. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for being enthusiastic about the culture of reading. Let us continue reading together and encouraging each other to read. For those who are not able to listen to this program, or if you'd want to listen to it again, you can be able to visit Radio Maria website page and be able to listen to the podcast that we shall be posting there. And at this point also, I would want to thank our studio technician, Mr. Timothy Morethi, who has recorded this program for us here at Pauline's Studio Nairobi for Radio Maria Nairobi. And until next week, I still encourage you, we continue reading. We are growing as a community, and we hope that we shall even one time have a moment together whereby we read and share our experiences of reading. So until next week, I've been your presenter and host, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul. Thank you for being with us, and may God bless you.
You have been listening to the Power of Reading program. Join us next week as we continue discovering the wonderful world of books. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.